among the greatest figures who appeared in pre-World War II Jewry in Eastern Europe, and who also had a profound effect on American Jewry, was Rabbi Elchanan. He was a very, very strong and charismatic person, and he saw in himself the necessity for being the strong leader at a time when the Jewish world was literally in dissolution. And he felt it to be incumbent upon himself to, so to speak, stand in the breach and try and defend the Jewish world, even though his heart told him that there were terrible times coming. Very difficult person to really define in terms of an article or in terms of a lecture, because of the fact that it's not his deeds as much as his personality that was the key to his greatness. But even from his life story and from his accomplishments, we can gain a glimmer of what he was. He was born in a small town in Lita called Beers. He was born in 1875. And he was from the last of the Talmidim, last of the generation of Talmidim that went to Volozhin. Volozhin closed in 1882, and he was bar mitzvah, and he was 13 years old in 1888. He was able to come to Volozhin. And his parents by then had moved from Beers to the city of Boysk, which was on the Latvian-Lithuanian border. Rav Kook was later there, the Rose. And in the yeshiva, he was known therefore as the Boysker. The yeshivas, especially in Volozhin, as in all the Lithuanian yeshivas, you were known by the name of the community that you came from. So nobody's last name was really the last name. The last name was the name of the community that one came from. Volozhin, even though he was very young, stamped upon him its indelible image of greatness in Torah. And not only greatness in Torah, but of search for truth. You have to understand that Volozhin was the hallmark of intellectual honesty. The two great Roshei Yeshiva who were there, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, and Chaim Soloveitchik, each in their own way, were people that to whom honesty was the first of all necessary intellectual qualities. We find in the general world, in science, and even in literature and in other things, that there are times when great people are not necessarily, don't play it honestly. There are pressures to produce a book, to produce a paper, to say something. In the scientific world, we hear oftentimes that researchers doctor the experiment to make it fulfill the goal, the pledge of what they want it to look like. Well, it's possible to do that in the Talmudic world as well. It's possible to, a person is brilliant, a person can say a Talmudic lecture, can deliver a shiur, that when one hears it, one is impressed with the brilliance, even though it is absolutely false. It is not true. And in fact, to a certain extent, Talmudic studies lend itself to mental gymnastics if one wants to pursue it in that fashion. The story is told about a number of great Rabbonim, great Roshei Yeshiva, who the students played a prank upon them, and they tore out a page in the book that they were learning, so that they had to tie together two completely disparate subjects without realizing that there's a page missing, and that's why, and they were able to do it. They're able to do it. As you saw, Salanter once remarked that in his youth, he once came to a community and they wanted to show him up. They were anti-Muslim, whatever, they wanted to show him up, so they took the Mari Makomos, which are the list of sources that he had prepared for his lecture. They took it off the bulletin board, and they substituted for it another set of Mari Makomos, another set of sources which had absolutely nothing to do one with the other. And he calmly looked at it and then delivered a lecture on those sources that they had posted. Well, if one is brilliant enough, one can do that. But that's not what Torah is about, and certainly not what the study of Talmud is about. And in Volozhin, for instance, we have as a record that many times Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik would come to deliver the lecture, and the students gathered around him, and he would begin the lecture, and then he would think it over, and then he would say, well, there's going to be no lecture today, no shiur today, because everything I wanted to say is wrong. I just thought it through, and I see that it's not correct. And that takes a lot of intellectual honesty. You've got the whole kit and caboodle waiting, you know, and they all came to hear the great Reb Chaim, and just to walk off the stage because of the fact that, and they would never know it's wrong. That's also part of the joy. But if in his mind it could not somehow be justified as being true, then there was no necessity to say it, no use to say it, and one should not say it. The Netziv also, you can find that in his books, in his commentaries, in his books, and especially in his response, in his tshuvas. The Netziv is absolutely not fancy. And he said that the search for truth, that's the search of Torah. We find that by many great people. The Sochachov, the Avnei Nezer, the Baron Burstein writes that when he came to his father-in-law, to the Kotzker Rebbe, so he came as a tremendous Eli genius who knew the Talmud at 14. So he said the first thing the Rebbe did was unlearn everything that I had learned. He knocked that all out of me. And then he taught me how to learn truthfully, how to learn in honesty. That hallmark of greatness, that was Rebbe Elchanan Wasserman. He didn't know what it was not to be true. Some people are devious by nature, but they force themselves to be true, which is a great achievement. But Rebbe Elchanan didn't understand even what it meant not to be true. The legend that's said about him is that when he came to Volozhin, so Volozhin at that time, there were many different types of students there already. Volozhin not only was the yeshiva that produced all the great rabbis in the Russian yeshiva of the 19th and part of the 20th centuries, but it also produced a great many secular Jews who were leaders and poets and etc., because it was a place of genius. And it was like the only game in town. You couldn't, a Jewish person, a Jewish young man with a great mind, so he couldn't say, well, I'm not going to go to Volozhin, I'm going to go to Yale this year. Or I'm going to go to Stanford, or I'm going to take off a year and go to MIT. That was not, so if you wanted to use your mind, you had to go to Volozhin. Because of that, in Volozhin, there were great minds and great Talmudic minds, but they weren't necessarily in sync with what Volozhin stood for. So there was a clandestine group that's the story that's told. There was a clandestine group that was studying German in Volozhin because they wanted to be modern. And in the late 1800s in Russia, you have to know either German or French to be modern. The Russian, Polish, that was not considered to be a language. If there was a time at the Tsar's court that French was the official language. I see in the New York Times every so often ads for a laundry that says that the Tsar of Russia sent his shirts to Paris to be washed or cleaned. It's hard to find a good laundry. And I can sympathize with the Tsar, right? But that was the elitist attitude, the intellectual attitude of the time was German or French. So they would study German. But the study of German was forbidden by the yeshiva. It was against the yeshiva's rules. So it was supposed to be a clandestine type of affair. they initiated, he was very young, Rebbe Elchanan, they initiated him in the group, and they said, wouldn't you like to know German? He said, sure, I'd like to know German. So, all right, so you'll go join the group, you'll learn German with us too. So he used to review the German lesson out loud in the middle of the Beis Medrash. He would conjugate the verbs. And so they came up to him and he said, stop, we're all going to get caught. He said, what do you mean caught? So they said, well, it's not allowed. I said, it's not allowed. I wouldn't have done it. I did. It's allowed. He didn't understand. He didn't understand that if you know it's not allowed, then why do you do it? And if it's allowed, then you can do it out loud. Why do you have to be hidden about it? So to a certain extent, that appears almost not childish, but childlike. There's a great difference between being childish and childlike. Childlike is a quality that people pray that they never lose. Childish is childish. But he had a childlike quality, and his approach to things that were true, and his approach, therefore, to study and to intellectualism was that approach of 100% truth. It's got to be at the end. Anyone who has had the great good fortune to deal with his works, with the Kovet Haoras or the Kovet Shiurim, and his works are, like little notes to the Talmud and to the Tosfos, but in the 3-4 lines, he says everything. But he says it like he's passing by, like someone else would make 500-page tome out of it. And he even called it that, Kovet, the collection, Haoras, of notes, of glosses didn't come to do anything great. And even in the Kovet Shiurim, which he has, which are longer lectures, which deal with the entire subject matter, one sees the unswerving loyalty to truth in every respect. And you find, in fact, in his books many times that he writes that what I once said, I now no longer, scratch out what was there. In one of his books, I saw that he said, that I don't have the copies of the book to recall it. But he said, but I know that that's not the correct interpretation of the Talmud, and you should withdraw it. And I think that this is not a correct interpretation. Let's forget what I had before. So he also used to say, and that he said in the yeshivas yet, I remember that one of his Talmidim was one of my Rabbeim. Mendel Kaplan, was a Talmud of Rebbe Elchanan from Boranovich. So Mendel used to say that the Rebbe always said, it's not our job, he said, to say Chidushim. It's not our job to say new things. Not our job to these flashes of brilliant lighting. He said, our job is only to know what is written. What do they mean? And the truth of the matter is that the more one becomes a Talmudic scholar, the more one realizes that that is what the job is. The accomplishment in learning is to know what the Talmud says, what Rashi says, what Tosfos says, what the great Rishonim say. What does the Rambam say? But to say something new, that's really beyond us. And he had an extremely strong imprint on the yeshiva world, because to a certain extent he did arrest the trend of those that wanted to say something new. He didn't allow it to happen. He kept it oriented towards understanding exactly what the text means, what does the Talmud mean, how can it be otherwise. In an institution such as Volozhin, which was famous for hasmoda and diligence in learning, where people spent 18, 20 hours a day on a regular basis in study, Volozhin was a non-stop yeshiva. Even they had shifts that even Yom Kippur, right after New Year, some men sat down to learn, so that the yeshiva would never be without learning. In such an institution, he excelled. He distinguished himself in his hasmoda, in his own personal diligence. And he was a punctilious person. He never deviated from the Shulchan Aruch. He never allowed himself any latitude. He never pampered himself. He never looked for an easier way for himself. And he never departed from what we call the pashtus, the simple, basic understanding and observance of halacha. He was also a handsome person, very handsome, very charismatic, an aristocratic person. And even though he never was a person of wealth at all, but he was a person who, his appearance, his garments were always in perfect order. Everything about him always reflected honor and a sense of aristocracy. After Volozhin, he went to Telz. And in Telz, he was the Talmud of the great Rebbe Lezer Gordon and also of Reb Shimon Shkop. Reb Shimon Shkop was Reb Lezer Gordon's nephew by marriage. Reb Shimon Shkop became a Rosh Yeshiva in Telz when he was 18 years old. He was Rosh Yeshiva for over 60 years for the Jewish people. And generations of disciples. And Rebbe Lezer Gordon was the Rav and the founder of the Telz Yeshiva. And he was they were a great influence upon him. Again, both of them reflected this loyalty to intellectual honesty above everything else, and both of them also had the aristocratic bearing and behavior pattern that he modeled himself after. So one influence, he comes from many places. The one influence was Volozhin. The second influence was Telz and Rebbe Lezer Gordon and Reb Shimon Shkop. That's the second influence. In 1897 and 1898, he spent time with Reb Chaim Brisker, with Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. What happened was that Volozhin closed. When Volozhin closed, Reb Chaim became the Rav of Brisk upon the death of his father. His father, Reb Yoshe Ber, died, and Reb Chaim became the Rav of Brisk. And Reb Elchanan spent a great deal of time with Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim would go to the city of Libava, which was in Latvia, for the summer. He'd go for 2 months in the summer. And Reb Elchanan accompanied him both times, in 1897 and 1898. And he said in that period of time, he was able to assimilate within himself the understanding of Reb Chaim's particular way of looking at Talmud, the terminology. Reb Chaim is the greatest innovator in Jewish education on the yeshiva level of his time. And he formed a new vocabulary, but aside from the new vocabulary of defining things, he provided a new searchlight of analysis, how to look at things, how to see things in the Talmud, how to see things in the Rambam. And that was a tremendous influence upon him. In 1899, when he was 24 years old, he married the daughter of Reb Meir Atlas. Reb Meir Atlas is one of the famous rabbinic figures in Lithuania. He was the Rav of Salant, and later on, he was also the Rav of Shavel in Lithuania, both of which were very famous positions. And Meir Atlas was literally a legendary figure in learning and Musar and in everything. So his daughter Nicola became Rebbe Chonen's wife, and he, as was the custom, the son-in-law moved into the father-in-law's house, and the father-in-law supported him for a number of years while he continued his learning. Even though Rebbe Chonen was already known as a great Talmud Chacham, and he already had offers of rabbinic positions and also of positions of being a Rosh Yeshiva, he declined to accept any of them, saying that he felt that the time was not right for him, and that he still had much more that he had to cover in his own learning before he'd be able to give out to others. He used to say always the famous expression which appears in the Talmud, Kebolo Kachpolto. Kebolo Kachpolto means it's a rule in kashrut. The amount that the pot absorbs, that's the amount that the pot gives out. Or that just like it absorbs, it can give out. Just like it absorbs a taste, it can give it back out. So he used that as a definition regarding how a Talmud Chacham, how a person should view himself in regards to helping the community. So Kebolo Kachbolto, if he absorbs a lot, then he can give something out. But if he didn't absorb very much, so then there's really not much that he can give to others. And there are times in life when one should be bolea, when one can absorb, and then there are times in life where, because of circumstances, family, everything else, that time ends, so then one can safely say that he can take a position of giving to others. But he felt that at this point in his life, he hadn't achieved that position yet. In 1903, he took a position finally in the city of Amchislav, which is in Russia, and he took the position of being a Rosh Yeshiva. Now, to be a Rosh Yeshiva naturally requires great knowledge, but it also requires the ability to teach. The two things don't always go together. There are people who have great knowledge, but they are not good teachers. There are people who are great authors, for instance, but on a level, a one-to-one level, doesn't come out. And then there are people who are great on a one-to-one level. And then they write a book, they write a sefer, and it doesn't necessarily do it. In the yeshiva world, they used to say that there are some, they used to say with names, I'm not going to say whose names out, but they used to say that there are those, that the sefer that they wrote is greater than they are, and there are those who are greater than the sefer that they wrote. And by that, we can certainly understand that the sefer is not always indicative of what the person is, because it's a different talent. The ability to write down is a different talent. There are countless examples of that. So, when he went out in 1903, so he was 28 years old, so he was a great lamdan, there's no question. He was a great scholar and a great Talmudist, etc., but that doesn't necessarily make you a great teacher. But there, in this small yeshiva, he revealed himself as being a pedagogue of the highest order, an extraordinary pedagogue. And he was blessed with the power of explaining the most difficult matters in a simple fashion. In fact, sometimes that power is a mixed blessing, because there are many times that the student, it's done so well that the student never appreciates the difficulty, and he's almost spoon-fed by the teacher, by the Rebbe, because the Rebbe has that great quality to be able to explain that well, to simplify the most complex analytical matters. I know that I've known a number of teachers in my lifetime, some of who I have worked with and some of who I've been their students, who had that ability, and I always found that to be a mixed blessing, because they were so good that the student didn't have to do much. Therefore, I always resolved that I would be vague. That way you get the maximum results. Rebbe Elchanan was a master educator. But he was not only a master educator in terms of the subject matter, but in terms of being the role model. Rebbe Elchanan was not just an intellect, he was a great heart. He was a tremendous soul. Anybody who has ever met any of his students, and again, I feel myself privileged that I knew a number of them and that I myself was a student of one of them, so that when they talk about him in terms of not of intellect, but they talk about him in terms of the greatness of the man's personality, of his soul, of his goodness, of his wit, of his quickness, of his ability to be incisive, of his compassion, of his clarity of understanding the personality of whom he was dealing with. And he also had the great quality, which is always the quality, I think, of a great man, is that he was many things to many people. Because he's not one-dimensional. Certain students need one type of a person, and certain students need another type of the person. And in a yeshiva, you always have different types of students who need different things. And the great educator that Rebbe Elchanan was, he was able not only to spot it, he was able to give each one what each one needed. And that really was the hallmark of his success. Again, he was so successful in the yeshiva, he was there only 2 years, that the yeshiva grew by leaps and bounds. However, he felt uncomfortable in the yeshiva, and he left in 1905. There were many political problems. Most of the communities in Europe had large yeshivas. So those communities that had the rabbi and the Rosh Yeshiva as the same person spared themselves a lot of problems. That was the case in Volozhin. That was the case in Slobodka. That was the case in Telz. That was basically the case in Mir. But there were other communities where it was two different people. And that many times caused personal problems, friction, a tense situation. And Rebbe Elchanan felt that here. And because of the fact that he was such an exemplary person who could not bring himself to participate in a situation that would be harmful or that would be negative, so he withdrew from the situation. And he went back home to his father-in-law in 1905 when he was 30 years old. He went back to his father-in-law at Meyeropolis, and he learned for another 2 years. In 1907, he did the thing that probably most influenced him in his life. The Chafetz Chaim, the Yisrael Meir HaTorah, had founded in Radin a kollel for the study of Kodshin, a kollel for the study of the laws regarding the temple in Jerusalem, regarding the sacrifices, regarding Seder Kodshin. Seder Kodshin was not particularly popular in the yeshiva curriculum, and its knowledge of it was rather sparse. And he felt, the Chafetz Chaim said many times that we are at the threshold of the Messianic era, and that there'll be Kohanim that will be required to perform in the Beit HaMikdash, and they won't know how. Which will be the ultimate irony, right? God will have provided us with the redemption, and we can see how ironic it is in our time too, that God provides us with things and we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to behave. We don't know what the rule is, what's the halacha. So therefore, the Chafetz Chaim founded in Radin this school, this Kollel Kodshin, and many of the leading brilliant people of Lithuania became its students. So in 1907, Rebbe Elchanan traveled to Radin, and he became one of the members of the Kollel Kodshin. So if we mentioned before that Rebbe Elchanan was a product of Volozhin, and that he was a product of Telz, and that he was a product of Reb Chaim Brisker, and that he was a product of his father-in-law, Meyeropolis, but the one person that he was the product of was the Chafetz Chaim. And in fact, he is known as the Talmud. He is the Talmud. If you say that the Chafetz Chaim had thousands of Talmudim, but if you want to say the disciple, the Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim, so in the yeshiva world, the name that will certainly be supplied is that of Rabbi Elchanan Bassin. He was enormously influenced by him and imitated him. He made himself over into a miniature Chafetz Chaim. He he developed the same simplicity of the time, the simple, Emuna Pshuta, the same plain faith, the same compassion for Jews, the same fire within him to do the right thing. And the practicality, the Chofetz Chaim was an enormously practical person. When something had to be done, so the Chofetz Chaim went out and did it. Jews were going to America. He wrote a book, How Jews Should Be Shomer Shabbos in America. Jews went to the Russian army. He wrote a book, How to Be a Good Jew in the Russian army. Now, these are all things that are not only practical, but they're things that most great rabbis at the time would not have done or would not have been able to do. And to the Chofetz Chaim, it was without question that that's what was necessary to be done. He invested in elchanan the same spirit of practicality, of doing it. There's a phrase today, just do it. Right? So there's a lot of truth in just doing it. And you can prepare all your life and never do it. Nothing ever comes of it. Never translated pragmatically. It's so much so that he was so alike to the Chofetz Chaim that many said that the Hasidic phrase that the same shoresh haneshama, their souls came from the same place. Everybody's soul comes from a quarry in God's heaven, so to speak. And not everybody's quarried from the same side, right? Just like if you take stone, right? So in the quarry, they have different patterns in the stone depending where the stone is taken from. So the same thing with a person's neshama, with a person's soul. But they said that Reb Elchanan and the Chofetz Chaim, they both were taken from the same place because they were literally mirrors of each other in their behavior and in their outlook. From that day on, from the time that he came to the Chofetz Chaim on, he never did anything without the Chofetz Chaim until the Chofetz Chaim's death. He would travel regularly to the Chofetz Chaim to converse with him. All major decisions were turned to the Chofetz Chaim. And to a great extent, he became the Chofetz Chaim's representative in the outside world when the Chofetz Chaim was already old and unable physically to do many of the demanding things that he wanted to do. Between Reb Elchanan Wasserman and Reb Hanezer Grodzinski, those were the two surrogates that the Chofetz Chaim used to develop his ideas and to enforce his plans and to share his visions with the Jewish people. He stayed for 3 years by the Chofetz Chaim. People say, I know my father-in-law, Shalim Bewell, says that he even used to imitate unconsciously the Chofetz Chaim's motions. The way he moved his hand, the way he spoke, the way he looked at people. Chofetz Chaim looked at people, right in the eye. He imitated his motions. He became a piece. The Chofetz Chaim became a piece of him, and he became a piece of the Chofetz Chaim. In 1910, Reb Elchanan returned to Brisk. Reb Chaim Brisker made a yeshiva, and Reb Elchanan returned to be one of the Rosh Yeshivas. But he's the one who made the Brisk-Radin connection, because he would send the Talmidim, the students from Brisk, to study at the Chofetz Chaim, to study at Radin for a period of time. And he himself used to daven every Yom in Noroyim in Radin with the Chofetz Chaim. As I mentioned before, he would, on any issue, even issues that others would consider to be minor, he never pursued the issue until first he discussed the matter with the Chofetz Chaim and had the benefit of his thoughts on the matter and his opinion. In 1914, the war broke out, the First World War, and the Jews, Brisk was the city of Brest-Litovsk, which was then near the border, and the Russians suspected the Jews of being disloyal, and because of that, the Russians forced the Jews to leave. They sent them into exile, not just from Brest-Litovsk, but almost from the entire Pale of settlement, so that hundreds of thousands of Jews were evicted overnight, wandered as refugees, and tens of thousands of them died. The Chafetz Chaim also was forced to leave. The Rebbe elchanan, who was driven out of Brisk, joined the Chafetz Chaim, and they were together in the first stop that they came, the city of Smilovitz, which is near Minsk. When the war came close to Smilovitz, so then the Chafetz Chaim fled further east into Russia. And elchanan stayed in Smilovitz and kept the yeshiva alive in the midst of terrible, terrible times. Starvation, war, pogroms, anti-Semitism, the Russian Revolution. I mean, it's just, when you read the history of this time, it just boggles the mind that anything or anybody could have survived it. And Rebbe elchanan, for 5 years, headed it till almost 1920. And Rebbe elchanan was the father and the mother. There were terrible outbreaks of infectious disease. There were Talmidim from the yeshiva who died. Rebbe elchanan was the one that took care of everything. He took it on his own shoulders. And the great flu epidemic of 1919 also wreaked havoc. And then the joy of running the yeshiva under the Bolsheviks. And the particular joy of running it under the Yiddish Bolsheviks. And he was able to hold up under all of that, because basically Rebbe elchanan was the Iron Man of the Jewish world. So he really had no personality that's as strong as he was. When the war was over, the yeshivas moved back to Poland to get out of Russia, to get out of the communist way, so they tried to get either to Lithuania or to Poland. And on the way back, the elchanan came to the city of Baranovich. Baranovich was a city of 30,000 people, 15,000 of whom were now Jews. And he established the yeshiva in Baranovich. It was ironic because Baranovich, during the reign of the Tsar, was one of the cities that Jews were not allowed to be there. And in fact, the Chafetz Chaim rejoiced, he said, because I remember that I used to travel from Baranovich, and in Baranovich there wasn't even a Jew, and now we are privileged to see that Baranovich is a thriving Jewish community, and it has a great yeshiva there, led by Rebbe elchanan. The yeshiva in Baranovich was always in precarious financial situation. And Rebbe elchanan, between the wars in the 1920s and 1930s, was the first time that the yeshivas in Eastern Europe came to depend upon American help. And many great Russian yeshivas came to the United States to collect money. The Mayor Shapiro, and then after Shimon Shkop, and also Rav Kook and the Kovner came to the United States, and Moshe Mordechai Epstein from Slobodka came to the United States. The United States became a station for the support of Torah in Europe. And in 1933, when the Chafetz Chaim was already at the end, Rebbe elchanan came to the United States. And he came to collect money, and there was a terrible depression here in the United States, but the poverty in Europe was just not to be believed. And the truth of the matter is that for $100, you could support the yeshiva. $100, you could support the yeshiva 3 weeks, 4 weeks. $100 American dollars. So if he raised $10,000, it was like a 6-7 year budget. Something which to us is unimaginable, but it was very hard to raise $10,000. You know, it's not the same numbers as today. I remember the Ponevezher told me once when I was in Miami with him that when he came to the United States then also in the 1930s to raise money for the yeshiva in Ponevezher, there was a lady in Philadelphia that gave him $1,000. He said that they didn't know what he just didn't know what to do, because he said $1,000 was like 7 months' budget, 8 months' budget from one person, from one lady. He said he went back home. He was funny. He went back to her the next day and she gave him another $1,000. He used to smile. He said he figured that it wasn't her last $1,000 that she gave him. But the elchanan came to America. Now, in 1933, Hitler came to power. The elchanan saw Hitler correctly. He saw what was going to happen. The elchanan wrote a monograph that's called Ikrisa the Mashiach, the footsteps of the Messiah, in which he described almost in prophecy the awful things that were going to happen, that the Jewish world would be destroyed. And he spoke there very openly about secularism, its contribution to the destruction of the Jewish world, and also very strongly about Zionism. The elchanan was a very strong anti-Zionist. The elchanan was one of the leaders of Agudas Yisrael, but even in Agudas Yisrael, he was less moderate than others. And he felt that a great deal of the problems that now were going to befall the Jewish people were the fault of secularism and nationalism, the fault of forsaking traditional Jewish life and the Torah, really the fault of assaulting the barrier and being confident that somehow it could be done by man alone without divine aid. All of the terrible errors of 19th and 20th century man are outlined in that essay, Ikrisa the Mashiach. I think, in my opinion, it still remains the strongest essay on the topic. And even though that there are many great people who disagree with him, but no one can disagree with the fact that he addressed the subject in a forthright, truthful, and incisive fashion. And till today, it's a masterpiece. And the tragedy of it, though, was how accurate he was what was going to happen to European Jewry. He had no doubt that Hitler was the avenging angel. He had no doubt that it was going to come. And yet, he himself, who was in the United States and had the opportunity to save himself, in 1938 went back. Because of his loyalty to the yeshiva, the loyalty to his students, and because there was an inner sixth sense that told him that, that was his place. Even though that was to him, he had no doubt that it was sure death. The people who implored him to stay in America, I've spoken to many of them. The people who took him to the boat, who said goodbye to him, they said they never saw such a moment in their lives. Now, when he was in the United States, many of the other great rabbis who came to the United States, they figured that whatever happens in the United States, that's just the way America is. So if things were not 100% according to halacha, so they weren't 100% according to halacha. Not Reb elchanan. Reb elchanan made a fuss everywhere he went. You make a fuss only on great things. But on what others, even in the practical rabbinate today, would consider to be minor things. For instance, I heard from a Rav that Reb elchanan was in his shul, and that day there were 2 bar mitzvahs on the same Shabbat, something which, God forbid, we have eliminated that. There is no longer in the Jewish world any Jewish mother that gives birth on the same day as any other Jewish mother. So we don't have the problem. But at one time the problem existed that you had 2 bar mitzvahs in the shul on the same day. I remember my father's shul said, it happened many times. So what did they do? Each child knew the Haftorah. So what they did is they split the minyan. When it came time for the master, they would take up this child's friends and relatives and invitees went into another room and went down to the Beis Medrash, and the child recited the Haftorah and the Bar Mitzvah, and the other one stayed here and he recited the Bar Mitzvah, right? And everybody was happy except for elchanan. He protested vehemently against it. So you'll say that's that's not what the Jewish world stands on. But by Rebbe Chonan, anything that was wrong was wrong. The little thing that was wrong was also wrong. And he left an imprint. I met many Rabbonim that said that Rebbe Chonan was in their shul, and he told them to do this, and he told them to do that, and they did it. Because it was Rebbe Chonan told you, then you had to do it. And he, to a great extent, provided a backbone to American Orthodoxy, which was sorely lacking at that time. American Orthodoxy had become accustomed to a great deal of laxness and acceptance because people figured, you were going to go down the tubes anyway. It was just a question of time, and that the Orthodoxy had no future, and since it had no future, it said, so we'll make the best of it the way we can, without a fuss. No use rocking the boat. Because of his faith, because of his clear faith and belief that not only would the Jewish people survive, and that Torah would survive, and it would survive even in America. So he was uncompromising because he knew that that's the way it would survive. If Rebbe Chonan would be able to come today and see America, it would be a different America than he saw then. But he would be vindicated because of the fact that it reflected his great strength, his great inner understanding of what happened. Rebbe Chonan was offered many times great rabbinic positions, and he was sorely tempted a number of times, especially when his father-in-law passed away. And his father-in-law, his last position was the Reverend Shavel, which I mentioned as a great Lithuanian rabbinic position. And the community of Shavel came to Rebbe Chonan and they said, "You're the logical person to fill your father's shoes." And his wife wanted him to take the position. And it was a matter of family tradition, and was other things that she wanted. And he refused. He said, first of all, he's not worthy. But he said, even if they would be able to convince him somehow that he could do a job there, he said he cannot leave the yeshiva. So he and his wife discussed the matter, and she still was very strong for his leaving to accept the position. So they made a compromise that they would go to the Chafetz Chaim and ask the Chafetz Chaim what to do. When they were ready to go, and he stood outside waiting for the carriage or the whatever it was that was going to take him to the train, that was going to take him to Rodden, he said to her, "But how can I leave the yeshiva?" Meaning that even if the Chafetz Chaim told him to go, emotionally he said, "How can I leave the yeshiva?" And she said, "We're not going." And to his dying day, he and his family remained in Baranovich. They never left. The name of the yeshiva in Baranovich was Oel Torah. He was not a political person, but nevertheless, he was, as I mentioned, one of the leaders of the Agudas Yisrael. And he was very outspoken. Again, as I mentioned, people many times said to him, if he would be less outspoken, he would be able to support the yeshiva better, because the ideological opponents of Rebbe Chonan were loath to give money to his institution. And therefore, if he would adopt a more moderate line, if he would trim the sails a little, at least publicly, it would be better. So he said, "You misunderstand." He said, "The yeshiva was founded to spread truth, not to collect money. The purpose of the yeshiva is not to collect money. Money is necessary in order that the yeshiva should survive, but that's not its purpose. Its purpose is to disseminate truth, to teach Torah as we see it be taught." So he said, "I cannot compromise the main reason for the existence of the yeshiva in order that that it should be easier to collect money. He said, if the main purpose would be to collect money, then you're right. Then everything is subservient to the main purpose. And his analysis of the coming war in 1939 was as follows. That the reason the world is going to war and the reason the world is in an economic depression is because man has lost trust in other people. He said that's a direct result of man having lost trust in God. Man has no faith. So if you have no faith in God, you have no faith in anything. You think the worst about the others, and you're not willing to trust others with money, you're not willing to do anything. That always brings to war. We should think of that in our time, too, because it's no less true. When the war broke out, so the elchanan fled to Vilna. And the city went from the Poles to the Russians, and the Russians to the Lithuanians, and then the Russians again. The city was full of yeshiva students. The elchanan, together with the Chaim, tried to do what they can. In June of 41, the Germans invaded Russia and almost immediately entered Vilna. And when that happened, then the Germans, together with Lithuanian collaborators, went searching for the great rabbis who were in Vilna. The elchanan was staying in the home of Rabbi Gajensky, who was then the mashgiach in Slobodka, Rabbi Kreiswert's father-in-law. And there they killed him. Some say he was hacked to death with hatchets, some say he was shot. It's not clear, but he was killed.
It's 1 a.m.
And he left 2 sons, Simcha Rassim, who made the yeshiva in Los Angeles, and today is in Ezra's Torah. The elchanan, the yeshiva that's in Ezra's Torah, is named after Elchanan Rassim. And the Simcha Rassim was the head of the Beis Yehudi yeshiva in Detroit as well, and really one of the outstanding mechanchim, a conduit to his father. And his son Moshe was an engineer who lived here in Brooklyn. There are many collateral members of the family that still survive. But the basically survives in his books, in his swearing, and through his disciples, and through the extremely strong influence that even today he still has on the Jewish world, certainly on the yeshiva, on the Torah world, as being the great strong man of the Jewish people in that generation, and being somehow able to transmit the greatness of Torah to that generation and allow it to survive the war, rebuild itself in Eretz Yisrael and here in the United States as well. And our discussion tonight is about Rabbi Yehuda Leib Eger, who is the grand